Walking into a bank should be simple. A transaction, a signature, maybe a short chat with the teller before moving on with your day. But what happens when one person's bias turns an ordinary moment into something unforgettable? When a confident transgender woman walks up to the counter, she's expecting nothing more than routine. Instead, she's met with something far worse. But when she finally speaks, no one in the building is prepared for what she says next. What do you think happens? Let us know in the comments below. Hailey Bates had walked into many rooms where people didn't know what to do with her. It came with the territory, being a transgender woman in a world that still struggled to understand her existence. At 31, she had learned to carry herself with confidence, with an unshakable presence that said, "I belong here," before anyone had the chance to suggest otherwise. She stepped into the bank, her heels clicking against the sleek tile floor, her presence commanding yet effortless. Dressed in fitted slacks and a deep burgundy blouse, her long chestnut hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders. She had a schedule to keep, errands to run, and no patience for nonsense. A few heads turned as she walked toward the line, but she was used to that. She had spent years perfecting the art of ignoring those lingering glances, the ones that flickered between curiosity and judgment, the ones that tried to dissect her, to find something that wasn't there anymore. She wasn't here for their approval. She was here to deposit a check. The line moved quickly, and soon she was at the counter. The name on the teller's badge read Brandon. Early 20s, too much gel in his hair, a crisp navy tie knotted a little too tight. He barely looked up at first, his fingers tapping at the keyboard as he greeted her with forced politeness. "How can I help you today?" Hailey slid the check across the counter. "Deposit, please," she said, her voice smooth, controlled. Brandon picked up the check, his eyes scanning it, and then, for the first time, he really looked at her. There was a flicker of something in his expression, a split-second hesitation, a slight narrowing of his gaze. She knew that look. It was the same one she had seen 1,000 times before, the one that started with curiosity and always ended with something uglier. His eyes darted down to her name on the check, Hailey Bates, then up to her face again, then back down. The pause stretched a little too long, his lips pressing into a thin line. "You got ID?" he asked, his tone suddenly cooler. It wasn't the request itself that bothered her. Banks asked for ID all the time. It was how he said it, like a challenge, like he was waiting for her to fail. Hailey reached into her purse and pulled out her driver's license, placing it down on the counter with deliberate ease. "Right here," she said. Brandon picked it up, and the change in his expression was almost imperceptible. Almost. The flick of his eye, the twitch at the corner of his mouth. He held the ID between his fingers for a second too long before exhaling through his nose, shaking his head just slightly. "This is you?" Hailey's fingers curled into her palm beneath the counter. She kept her expression neutral. This wasn't the first time she had been asked that question, but it never failed to send a sharp pulse of irritation through her. "Yes," she said, keeping her voice even. Brandon let out a short chuckle, shaking his head again, as if she had just told him the sky was green. "Huh," he muttered. The sound sent a ripple through her spine. He handed the ID back, still smirking as he typed into his computer, but his hands moved slower now, his posture shifting slightly as he took his time with the transaction. Deliberate. Stalling. "So," he said, voice laced with something she couldn't quite place yet. "How long you had this ID?" Hailey felt a sharp spike of irritation. He wasn't asking out of necessity. He was pushing. "Since I legally changed my name and gender marker," she said smoothly. "Years ago." Brandon gave a small nod, as if pretending to take that into consideration. "Right," he said. Then, after another pause, "You know, sometimes these systems flag things like this, just for security reasons." Security reasons. The words were meant to sound official, impersonal, but the smug curve of his lips told her exactly what he meant. He wasn't just doing his job. He was enjoying this. Hailey exhaled slowly through her nose. She could feel the eyes of other customers drifting toward her, quiet spectators sensing something happening but not daring to intervene. She tilted her head slightly, studying Brandon now, the same way he had been studying her. "Tell me," she said, voice calm but sharp, "does the system flag everyone who deposits a check, or just the ones you think don't belong?" Brandon's smirk faltered just slightly. He glanced to the side, as if checking whether anyone else was watching. "I didn't say that," he replied, his voice lower now, but no less smug. "You didn't have to," Hailey shot back. For the first time since the conversation began, Brandon's composure slipped. Just a little, a flicker of discomfort in his eyes. She had seen it before. The moment when someone realized she wasn't going to let them get away with their passive-aggressive games. The air between them tightened. The quiet murmurs of the bank seemed to dim, the weight of their exchange pressing into the space around them. Brandon cleared his throat, shifting in his chair. "I just mean, unusual transactions sometimes get flagged. Just being careful." Hailey arched an eyebrow. "Unusual?" She let the word hang there, thick with implication. "You mean a transgender woman depositing a check in her own name?" A hush spread through the room. Even the customers who had been pretending not to listen were suddenly paying attention now. Brandon's throat bobbed in a hard swallow. "I didn't." "Because if that's the case," Hailey interrupted, her voice cutting clean through whatever excuse he was about to make, "then maybe I should be asking you some security questions, like, say, does this bank always allow employees to humiliate paying customers, or is that just your personal touch?" A stunned silence settled over the space. Brandon's jaw tightened. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, but he didn't type. For the first time since this conversation started, he was the one feeling small. Hailey didn't blink, didn't flinch. She had spent years shrinking under stares like his, under the weight of a world that wanted her to apologize for existing. She was done with that. The check was still on the counter, waiting to be deposited, and Hailey wasn't going anywhere. The silence that had spread through the bank was thick, suffocating. Customers shifted awkwardly, some pretending not to hear, others frozen in place, unsure whether they should step in or stay silent. The sound of someone clearing their throat cut through the tension, but no one spoke. Hailey didn't break eye contact. She stood tall, shoulders squared, refusing to give an inch. The weight of Brandon's condescension pressed against her, but she had withstood worse. Much worse. Brandon's fingers twitched over the keyboard, his jaw working as he searched for some way to reassert control. The arrogance that had clung to him just moments ago was slipping, crumbling beneath the weight of an audience he hadn't expected. He had assumed she would shrink, that she would take the humiliation and let it roll off her back like so many before her. But Hailey Bates was not one to shrink. His mouth opened, then closed again. He inhaled sharply through his nose like a child trying to suppress frustration, before forcing out a clipped, "I was just following procedure." Hailey let the words hang between them. "And what procedure is that?" she asked, her voice calm but unrelenting. "Singling out transgender women who walk in to deposit their own money?" His face twitched. A flash of something passed through his eyes. Panic, anger, the realization that he had underestimated her. "That's not what this is," he muttered, shaking his head. "Then explain it," Hailey challenged, tilting her head slightly. "Tell me why I'm standing here waiting longer than every customer before me, watching you stall because my name doesn't match whatever expectations you had in your head." Brandon's lips pressed into a thin line. He glanced over his shoulder as if hoping for backup, but the other tellers were keeping their heads down, their eyes flicking back to their own screens, unwilling to get involved. A few customers murmured, shifting uncomfortably, while others simply watched with quiet intrigue. A woman in line near the back let out a soft tsk, crossing her arms. "Just deposit the check already," she muttered under her breath. Brandon heard it. His expression darkened for just a moment before smoothing over into something more controlled. He exhaled sharply, as if shaking off the confrontation, and finally, began to type. The rhythmic tapping of the keyboard filled the room, but Hailey didn't move. She wasn't done. She knew his type, the kind of man who thought he could get away with little slights, microaggressions disguised as policies. The kind who thought his discomfort with who she was gave him the right to dictate how she should exist. And Hailey wasn't about to let this moment pass without making it clear people like him didn't get the last word anymore. "You know," she said, her voice even, conversational, "you remind me of the first HR rep I ever had to deal with." Brandon hesitated in his typing, but didn't look up. Hailey continued. "This was before my transition was legally recognized on paper. I was working at a law firm, good pay, good benefits. Everything should have been fine." She let out a soft chuckle, but there was no amusement in it. "But there was always that one person, that one who couldn't stand the fact that I existed in the same space as them. Couldn't let it go." He started small, questioned whether I should be using the women's restroom, made jokes under his breath when he thought I couldn't hear. She folded her arms, tapping one manicured nail against her sleeve. "But then he got comfortable. Started making sure my emails got lost. Talked over me in meetings, acted like I wasn't in the room. It took months before I realized what he was really doing. He wasn't just being rude. He was testing me, waiting for me to get frustrated, to snap, so he could turn around and call me difficult." Brandon's jaw tensed. He kept typing, but Hailey could tell he wasn't focused on the screen anymore. "I wonder," she mused, tilting her head slightly. "Is that what you were doing just now? Pushing, waiting for me to make a scene, so you could sit back and act like I was the problem?" His hand stilled completely. Hailey smiled. "Because if that was the plan, you might want to rethink it. The world's changing, Brandon. People aren't putting up with this anymore." He swallowed hard. His entire body was rigid now, tension rolling off him in waves. The sound of a printer whirring filled the space, and finally, he tore the slip from the machine and slid it across the counter toward her without a word. "Thanks," Hailey said, slipping the receipt into her bag. Brandon exhaled sharply, but didn't respond. As Hailey turned, ready to leave, she caught sight of the bank manager standing near the far end of the lobby. A stout woman in her 50s, dark hair pulled into a tight bun, expression unreadable. But her arms were crossed, her head slightly tilted. She had been watching. Honey met her gaze, then smiled. The woman nodded once. Small, subtle, but unmistakable. Hailey turned and walked toward the exit, each step deliberate, unhurried. She could feel the shift in the room behind her, the weight of what had just happened settling over the air. Conversation started up again, hushed whispers blending into the usual hum of the bank. As she stepped outside, the crisp air hit her skin, and she exhaled slowly. She wasn't angry anymore. She had done what she came to do. And something told her Brandon wouldn't forget this interaction anytime soon. The sound of the bank doors closing behind Hailey echoed faintly as she walked toward her car, her heels clicking against the pavement with every step. She didn't turn back, didn't need to see the faces inside to know what they were feeling. Some would be embarrassed, shifting uncomfortably in their places. Others would pretend they saw nothing, that it wasn't their business. And then there were the ones who had enjoyed it, who had silently rooted for Brandon, even if they hadn't had the courage to say it out loud. She exhaled, her grip tightening around her bag. She was used to moments like this, but that didn't mean they didn't sting. It wasn't about being sensitive. It was about being tired. Tired of being the bigger person. Tired of having to prove herself over and over again as if her existence required some sort of justification. Sliding into the driver's seat, she pulled out her phone and stared at the screen for a second before pressing dial. "Hey, babe," came a warm voice on the other end. Hailey's lips twitched into a small smile. "Hey, Kara. Everything okay?" She hesitated for a second. "Not really," she admitted. A pause. Then the sound of rustling, like Kara was shifting into a better position. "What happened?" Hailey sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Just the usual." Kara didn't ask for clarification. She knew what that meant. "What did they do?" Hailey glanced at the bank through her rearview mirror. The teller, Brandon, I think his name was a condescending little prick, made a big deal about my ID, smirked like he was trying to put me in my place. A sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Oh, hell no. Did you report him?" "I handled it," Hailey murmured. Kara didn't speak right away. That was the thing about her. She never rushed Hailey into saying more than she was ready to, but when she did finally respond, her voice was gentle. "I'm proud of you," she said. Hailey let out a short laugh, though it was tinged with exhaustion. "Why? Because I didn't let some minimum wage bank teller steamroll me? Because you spoke up, and because you keep speaking up even when it would be easier not to." Hailey felt something tighten in her chest. She didn't always feel strong. In fact, she often felt like she was just barely holding herself together. But hearing Kara say it like that, it made her feel seen. Kara exhaled. "Want me to come over? We can watch trashy reality TV and make fun of rich people problems." Hailey smiled. "Tempting, but I think I just need a moment to breathe first." Kara hummed in understanding. "Call me later?" "Yeah," Hailey promised. "I will." She hung up and set her phone down in the passenger seat. For a few moments, she just sat there, letting the weight of the day settle in. Then, with one last glance at the bank, she put the car in drive and pulled away. Back inside, the tension still lingered. Brandon hadn't moved from behind his station, but he could feel the stares digging into his skin. He could hear the murmurs, the low hum of customers whispering about what had just happened. He clenched his jaw, his fingers tightening around the edge of the counter. She had embarrassed him, right there in front of everyone, and worse, she had made him feel small. His manager, Mrs. Calloway, was watching him. She had been standing near her office door during the whole exchange, arms crossed, expression unreadable. When their eyes met, she tilted her head slightly, then gestured toward her office. Brandon swallowed hard. He already knew this wasn't going to go well. Pushing back from his desk, he forced himself to keep his expression neutral as he followed her into the office. The door shut behind them with a quiet click. Mrs. Calloway leaned against her desk, arms still folded. Brandon obeyed. For a moment she just looked at him, studied him. He hated it. "What the hell was that?" she asked finally. Brandon exhaled sharply, shifting in his seat. "I don't know what you mean." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't play dumb with me, you know exactly what I mean." He set his jaw, staring at the floor. Was that necessary? She pressed. The attitude, the stalling, the humiliation? Brandon frowned. "I was just doing my job." Mrs. Calloway let out a short, humorless laugh. "That's funny, because I don't recall your job description saying anything about belittling customers." Brandon's fists clenched in his lap. "I didn't belittle her." Mrs. Calloway raised a brow. "No? Because from where I was standing, it sure as hell looked like you did." Brandon stayed silent. She sighed, shaking her head. "I don't tolerate discrimination in this bank, Brandon. And what you did just now? That wasn't just poor customer service. That was discrimination." His face burned. "That's not fair." "No, what's not fair is a customer walking in here and getting treated like a second-class citizen because of some personal bias you can't keep in check." Brandon's jaw worked as he struggled for something to say, some way to defend himself. But what could he say? That he hadn't meant anything by it? That it was just instinct? That it was just the way he was raised? Mrs. Calloway sighed, rubbing her temples. Here's the deal. I can write you up, and next time something like this happens, you're out. Or you can take responsibility and agree to sensitivity training. Brandon's stomach twisted. Sensitivity training? He already knew how that would go, some corporate rep droning on about inclusion and respect, forcing him to sit there and nod like he agreed with every word. But he didn't have a choice. He swallowed his pride and forced out, "I'll do the training." Mrs. Calloway nodded once, satisfied. Good. Because if I ever hear about something like this happening again, you won't get a second chance. She stood, walked to the door, and opened it. Get back to work. Brandon stood stiffly and walked out, every step feeling heavier than the last. When he returned to his station, he could feel the customers watching him. He could hear the whispers, see the looks of quiet disapproval. For the first time, he felt the weight of what he had done, and he wasn't sure he liked it. Hailey pulled into her driveway and shut off the engine. The silence inside her car was almost suffocating, the kind that settled in after a confrontation, after adrenaline wore off and reality set in. She had spoken up for herself, again, and while she knew it was the right thing to do, there was still a part of her that was exhausted, not because she regretted it, but because it was always something, always a moment where she had to prove she belonged, where she had to hold her ground while someone else tried to strip it away. She let her head fall back against the headrest and closed her eyes for a second, inhaling slowly. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Ava. You okay? Did you leave, or are you still fighting? Hailey smirked slightly, shaking her head as she typed back. Left. I think I made my point. The response came almost instantly. Damn right you did. Want to come over? I got wine. She hesitated before responding. The idea of sitting on Ava's couch, drinking wine and watching bad reality TV was tempting, but she needed time to decompress. Rain check. Just need to sit with myself for a bit. Got it. Proud of you, babe. Text me if you change your mind. Hailey tossed her phone onto the passenger seat, grabbed her purse, and stepped out. The air was crisp, the kind of late afternoon breeze that carried the promise of evening. She walked up the front steps of her small townhome, unlocked the door, and was immediately greeted by the soft patter of paws against hardwood. Luna, I swear you have the best timing, she murmured as the small terrier mix hopped up onto her legs, tail wagging furiously. She scooped the dog into her arms, pressing a kiss against its head before setting her down and making her way into the living room. She kicked off her heels, unbuttoned the top of her blouse, and flopped onto the couch, exhaling sharply. A part of her wanted to forget the bank incident, to let it go, push it aside, and not give it any more space in her head. But another part of her knew that it wasn't just about her. How many other trans women had walked into that bank before her? How many had stood there, waiting for their money to be deposited, only to be met with the same smirk, the same slow, deliberate stalling? And how many had just taken it? She hated that thought. Hated the idea that someone like Brandon had been doing this for who knows how long, unchecked because no one else had wanted to be difficult. Her mind replayed the exchange, every glance, every smug smirk, the way his confidence had wavered the moment she didn't back down. It wasn't enough. She sat up, reaching for her laptop. It was time to make sure Brandon and people like him learned that their actions had consequences. She typed quickly, words spilling out onto the screen. To whom it may concern. Today I visited your bank branch expecting to complete a simple transaction. What I received instead was blatant discrimination from one of your employees. Her fingers flew over the keyboard as she detailed everything. The stalling, the unnecessary ID check, the way he made her feel. She kept it professional, kept it measured, but she made sure it carried weight. By the time she was finished, she felt lighter. It wouldn't erase what had happened, but it would make sure it wasn't ignored. She hit send, and with that she closed the laptop, leaned back, and let out a long breath. At the bank, Brandon sat at his station, his knee bouncing under the desk. The customers had returned to their normal routine, but he could still feel their judgment. He was used to being confident, he was used to getting away with things, but today was different. Mrs. Calloway's words rang in his head. That wasn't just poor customer service, that was discrimination. The words sat uncomfortably with him. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He hesitated before checking it. A text from his friend Matt. "Yo, dude. Heard what happened. People are talking." His stomach twisted. He glanced toward the lobby. Were people really talking? Was it that big of a deal? He knew he had pushed Hailey, had done it on purpose, but it wasn't like he had yelled at her. It wasn't like he had called her anything offensive. So why did he feel like this? He was still lost in thought when Mrs. Calloway stepped out of her office and into the main lobby. She carried herself the same way she always did. Calm, no nonsense, but right now, something about her expression made Brandon uneasy. She held up a printed piece of paper. "Brandon, my office, now." His stomach dropped. The walk to her office felt longer this time. When he stepped inside, she didn't tell him to sit, didn't give him that calm stare like before. Instead, she tossed the paper onto the desk. "Care to explain this?" Brandon's eyes flicked to the header. Formal complaint submission, customer discrimination report. Hailey had filed a complaint. He felt a rush of anger at first. He had already been scolded, had already agreed to the stupid sensitivity training. Did she really need to make this a whole thing? Mrs. Calloway watched him carefully. "I told you earlier that what you did had consequences. This is one of them." "This complaint?" "It's going straight to corporate. They don't take these things lightly." Brandon clenched his jaw. "So what? She wants me fired?" "I don't know," Mrs. Calloway said. "But I do know that if you want to keep your job, you need to take a hard look at how you treat people. Because this," she tapped the paper, "this is a pattern." He wanted to argue, to say that it wasn't fair, that it was just one moment, but deep down, he knew better. This wasn't just about Hailey. It was about all the others, the ones who hadn't spoken up, the ones who had let him get away with it. Mrs. Calloway leaned against the desk, sighing. "You can either learn from this, or you can keep going down this road until there's no coming back. It's up to you." Brandon swallowed hard. For the first time, he didn't know what to say. And for the first time, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he had been wrong. Hailey didn't expect a response right away, but she also didn't expect to feel so restless after sending the complaint. She had done what she needed to do. It wasn't about revenge or trying to ruin someone's life. It was about making sure people like Brandon learned that they couldn't treat transgender people, or anyone for that matter, like second-class citizens. She tried to go about her evening as usual. She made herself dinner, turned on a movie, and curled up with Luna on the couch, but her mind kept drifting back to the bank. The way Brandon's smirk had twisted into something smaller when she challenged him. The way the other customers had watched but said nothing. The way the bank manager had locked eyes with her as if taking it all in. She didn't regret standing up for herself, but the weight of it still sat heavy in her chest. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, snapping her out of her thoughts. Unknown number. "Hi, Hailey, this is Mrs. Calloway from the bank. I wanted to reach out personally regarding your complaint. Would you be open to a conversation?" She stared at the screen for a moment before picking up her phone. She hadn't expected that. Usually complaints like this went through faceless customer service reps who sent back generic responses. But this was different. She hesitated, then typed back, "Of course, I appreciate you reaching out." The phone rang within seconds. Hailey took a breath before answering. "Hello? Hi, Hailey. This is Angela Calloway. I just wanted to personally apologize for what happened today." Hailey appreciated the directness, no fluff, no excuses, just straight to the point. "I appreciate that," she said. "But honestly, it's not just about me. I'm sure I'm not the first person Brandon's treated like that. There was a pause on the other end. You're not, Mrs. Calloway admitted. And that's why I wanted to call. Your complaint is being taken seriously. Corporate is reviewing it and there will be action taken. Hailey exhaled. She wasn't sure what kind of action they meant, but at least it wasn't being brushed under the rug. I also wanted to ask if you'd be willing to come in and meet with me, Mrs. Calloway continued. I'd like to hear your perspective, if you're comfortable sharing. Hailey hesitated. Walking back into that bank wasn't exactly something she wanted to do, but if it meant actually making a difference, it might be worth it. Amen. Tomorrow morning, if you're available, before we open. No customers, no distractions. Hailey nodded to herself. That sounded better. Okay, she said. I'll be there. Thank you, Hailey, Mrs. Calloway said. I'll see you then. The call ended, and Hailey set her phone down, staring at the screen. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but she was ready for it. Brandon sat in his car outside the bank, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He had barely slept. After Mrs. Calloway had handed him the formal complaint, reality had sunk in like a lead weight in his stomach. He had thought he was untouchable, that the little things he said and did would never catch up to him. But now he wasn't so sure. He had never been called out like that before. And the worst part? He couldn't stop thinking about it. He had told himself for years that people like Hailey were just being sensitive, that it wasn't his fault if they couldn't take a joke, or if they got offended over nothing. But was it nothing? He had stalled her transaction on purpose. He had smirked at her, tested her patience, waited for her to get flustered, because deep down something about her made him uncomfortable. And now, as he sat in his car, staring at the reflection of the bank's sign in his windshield, he had to ask himself a question he had never considered before. Why? Why did he care what Hailey was? Why did it bother him enough to make him act like that? He didn't have an answer. A sharp knock on his passenger side window made him jump. He turned his head and saw Mrs. Calloway standing outside, her arms crossed. He rolled down the window. You plan on sitting out here all morning? She asked. Brandon sighed and rubbed his eyes. No, just thinking. She studied him for a moment. Good. You need to. Brandon glanced up at her. She's coming in, isn't she? Mrs. Calloway nodded. Yes. And I expect you to be here too. His stomach twisted. For what? You'll see, she said. Then, after a pause, you have a choice to make, Brandon. You can either keep going down this path or you can actually learn from this. But that's up to you. She turned and walked back inside, leaving him alone with his thoughts. For the first time, he wasn't sure what he wanted to do. But he knew one thing. He couldn't ignore this anymore. Hailey stepped into the bank the next morning, the air inside cooler than she remembered. It was quieter, too. No customers, no rustling papers or quiet conversations. Just the faint hum of computers and the rhythmic tapping of a keyboard somewhere in the back. Mrs. Calloway was already waiting near her office. She was dressed professionally as always, her dark blazer neatly pressed, her hair pulled into its usual bun. But there was something else in her expression today, something that wasn't just authority. It was consideration. Good morning, Hailey, she greeted with a small nod. Morning, Hailey responded, adjusting the strap of her purse. Mrs. Calloway gestured toward her office. Shall we? Hailey followed, stepping inside and taking a seat in one of the two chairs in front of the desk. She was about to speak when she heard the door click shut again. She turned her head. Brandon. His hands were shoved into his pockets, his usually smug expression nowhere to be found. He looked uncomfortable, shifting on his feet, his eyes flicking toward the floor before finally settling on Mrs. Calloway. You ready? She asked him. Brandon hesitated, then nodded. Yeah. Mrs. Calloway sat down behind her desk, folding her hands in front of her. Hailey, I wanted you to come in today not just so we could talk about what happened, but so you could hear firsthand what's being done about it. Brandon has agreed to attend mandatory training on workplace inclusivity. And more than that, we've had a long conversation about his role here. Hailey tilted her head slightly, her eyes moving to Brandon. He wasn't looking at her. Mrs. Calloway continued, "Brandon, I believe you have something to say." Brandon exhaled. It was sharp, a little uneven. He finally looked up, meeting Hailey's gaze for the first time since that day at the counter. He started, then stopped. His fingers twitched at his sides before he forced them to still. "I messed up." The words came out flat, but not in a way that suggested he didn't mean them. If anything, he looked like someone who had never had to say them before. "I shouldn't have treated you the way I did," he admitted. "I shouldn't have made you feel like you weren't supposed to be here." He shifted uncomfortably. "I don't have an excuse, He swallowed. "I guess I never thought about it before. Never thought about how it felt to be on the other side of it." Hailey studied him. His words weren't perfect. They weren't smooth or carefully rehearsed. But there was something real in them. "And now?" she asked. Brandon took a breath. "Now I'm thinking about it." Mrs. Calloway spoke up again. "I've made it clear to Brandon and to the rest of the staff that this bank will not tolerate discrimination of any kind, period. That means new training, new policies, and a commitment to making sure every customer feels respected. But I also believe in giving people the opportunity to learn and grow." Hailey nodded slowly, processing it all. She had expected some kind of corporate response, a sterile promise to do better with no real intention behind it. But this was different. She looked at Brandon again. "I don't need you to be my best friend," she said, her voice calm but firm, "but I do need you to understand that people like me exist, and that we aren't going anywhere." Brandon nodded. "I get that now." Hailey studied him for another second, then finally exhaled. "Good." Mrs. Calloway stood. "Thank you for coming in, Hailey, and thank you for holding us accountable." Hailey stood as well, offering a small smile. "That's all I ever wanted." She turned toward the door but hesitated before walking out. Brandon was still standing there, hands still shoved into his pockets. He didn't smirk, he didn't sneer, he just nodded once. A silent acknowledgement. And for now, that was enough. The sun was bright as Hailey stepped out of the bank, warmth touching her skin in a way that felt different today. Lighter. She pulled out her phone and called Ava. "Tell me it went well." Ava answered immediately. Hailey let out a soft laugh. "It went well." "Really?" Ava sounded surprised. "Yeah, Brandon actually apologized." A pause. Then, "Wait, seriously? Like a real apology?" "As real as I think he's capable of right now." Ava whistled. "Damn. Did you look him in the eye while he melted into a puddle of regret?" Hailey laughed. "Something like that. That's my girl." Ellie smiled, shaking her head. "Thanks for having my back through all this." "Always," Ava said. "So, you coming over? I still have that wine." Hailey glanced up at the sky. The day felt new, open. "You know what? Yeah, I think I will." And for the first time in a long time, she felt truly, completely at peace.